Hello from Geneva and the 18th edition of the Geneva International Human Rights Film Festival. I'm Josephine Schmidt, the editor of the New Humanitarian. We're a nonprofit newsroom based here in Geneva, and we report on humanitarian crises around the world, from conflict zones to environmental and health emergencies to refugee and displacement situations, basically anywhere people's lives and livelihoods have been upended. And I'm delighted today to be here with three individuals who are at the front lines of ensuring that journalists who report for the New Humanitarian and others can do their work, even though often they're in situations where just one word could mean that they're thrown in jail. Those last words come from an editor in Myanmar who speaks in the film Courage, Journalism is Not a Crime. We're not showing the film this evening, as all of the films for the film festival have been canceled, but we have not been silenced, and we're here to discuss recent clampdowns on freedom of expression, what they look like in the media world, how they threaten journalists' lives and livelihoods, also how they threaten the general public and democracies old and new, and what can be done to ensure that more voices are not silenced. To introduce my colleagues who are here today, I'm with Agnès Callamard, who is the director of the Columbia Global Center on Freedom of Expression, and she is also the UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial, summary, and arbitrary executions. It was in that role that she conducted the UN investigation into the killing of Saudi journalist and Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. Also with us is Hatice Cengiz, who is a researcher on Middle Eastern politics and a strong voice for the rights of freedom of the press, a role that she took on after the murder of her fiancé, Jamal Khashoggi, in October 2018 in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. And I'm delighted to have with us Emin Huseynov, an investigative journalist and human rights activist who was a co-founder and director of the Institute for Reporters' Freedom and Safety in Azerbaijan. He is featured in the film Courage. If you all get a chance to watch it, it's available online. He's now living in Geneva, where he was forced to flee under threat of imprisonment in Azerbaijan. I'd like to start really with defining what's a very broad term, threats against a free press or threats against freedom of expression. Those threats are nothing new. They take many, many different forms. Efforts to silence and even kill the messenger have been going on for a long while, and they morph along with the media world. We can think about the rise in citizen journalists, the rise in social media and digital distribution, and as the media concocts new ways to reach a public, ones who would like to stop the public from getting this information concoct new ways to clamp down on that. So I'd love to start just with an overview, a sense of what do threats to the press look like from your vantage point. And Agnès, I'd love it if you'd start us off.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with my two friends and colleagues. Threats against a free press, threats against journalism, unfortunately can take many forms and many shapes. On one hand, and the one that concerns me the most as a special rapporteur are the physical attacks, the physical use of violence against journalists, going all the way to their killings. They may be journalists, they may be bloggers, they may be citizen journalists. There are, several dozens every year who are killed because of their work. But that's not the only form of silencing. Threats, silence, and whether they are conducted online or offline. I personally receive dozens of allegations of threats against journalists, and there are far more. All the way to the imprisonment and more generally the use of law to silence either the media or the journalists themselves. One of my dear friend, Maria Ressa, who is a very well-known Filipino journalist and editor, has termed the current situation as lawfare, meaning a form of war using the legal tools, instrumentalizing the law to target freedom of expression and to silence the media. She herself is under dozens of lawsuits conducted and driven by either private individuals or the governments, but she's not the only one. So legal threats are on the increase, whether they are linked to free speech law or just corporate law, tax law, any kind of legal tools are currently being used. I think what is, however, going to distinguish that current period from the past, the recent past, is the fact that we now have a large number of elected political officials that do not hesitate to go after the media, to attack the media as an institution, to attack individual journalists and to name individual journalists. The American president has certainly made it one of his public speciality to do so, but he is not the only one. Elected officials around the world feel that they do have the authority to target the media, to attack the role of the media, to accuse them of so-called fake news. I think that, to me, is what is distinguishing our era from what preceded it immediately.
So in a way, it's a spate of copycat crimes with one government, one organization following the so-called bad behavior of another.
Yes, I think they do engage in that copycat. I think most importantly, they are targeting democratic institutions. And the media is one of the very important institutions, not formal one, but it plays a great, an important role for the protection of democracy and human rights. And this is why they are being targeted along with other institutions. The justice sector indeed is being targeted. The independence of the judiciary is at stake. But by targeting the media, those elected officials, those leaders are really ensuring that the public is made incapable of being informed, and they are silencing any kind of investigative journalism, any kinds of truth-telling, any kind of critical reporting.
So it's a movement toward disempowerment. Very insidious and unforgiving, yeah. Really. Hatice, I would, I love the term lawfare. We often talk about, when we talk about threats to freedom of the press, we use words of war, words of battle, for instance. And you and Jamal, of course, paid the highest price in that battle. But he knew long before he walked into the Saudi embassy in Istanbul in October 2018, he knew long before that he was a target. Could you talk to us a bit about what he was facing as a journalist in Saudi Arabia, and why he left?
Yes. It is a very difficult question, and I might not be able to answer you briefly.
It's okay.
When the revolution started in the what we call the Arab Spring revolutions, when these began, the problem arose at that time. The problem did not start when Mr. Jamal left the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It didn't happen from one day to the next. All this started with the beginning of the Arab Spring revolution. So when Jamal took a position, he was targeted. His target, the fact that they targeted him started at that time. But in 2017, when he felt that what he had presented as a journalist, as an expert, as a political analyst, he was unable to continue his work and to exercise his work in the kingdom. Especially, he understood it was time to leave the country and to go somewhere where he could exercise his work as a journalist. And from that time, Jamal did not expect that he would be targeted to such a level, that is to say, that he would be killed.
من قريب طبعا كانت علاقة عاطفية وقريبة جدا بيني وبين جمال.
Of course, there was a close tie between Jamal and I. He was talking about his feelings towards his country. He always said that my relationship with my country is a friendly one. It is true I criticized them, but he never imagined that he would be killed. He just thought he was a journalist who had serviced his country, served his country. They respected his work more than his political or last political position or stand. And that was a very positive analysis. But on the day he was killed, even on that day, nobody ever imagined that such an event would take place. The targeting of Jamal. So we understand from this killing, I, as a young person or a young researcher, that targeting journalists in the Middle East region has gone through a point of no return. Jamal was drawing the attention as he was alive. He was saying that we need space for the freedom of press and the media, and he paid the price by losing his own life. And now what we have to do is we should not forget this cause and this case and what was done to Jamal. And this space should be open to the other journalists in the Middle East, because until this very moment, nobody has come as Jamal to defend Jamal's rights. This is a very important point. So the Middle East does not produce daily journalists like Jamal. And if we leave things as they are and we do not render the perpetrators accountable, how can we have journalists who would come similar to Jamal? How would we find such journalists?
I want to get back to that point of accountability and of giving voice to what befell him, and also I think what you're pointing out is that he felt he had to leave Saudi Arabia in order to give voice to colleagues, etc., who could no longer speak out.
Exactly. This is what he used to say. Those who were imprisoned in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and many of them were my friends, he said, and my colleagues at work. And I cannot continue to live my life and not do anything not right. You know that there was an embargo on the social media, on the Twitters, and he didn't write on Twitter, and that's why he left the kingdom. So he used to say, I was unable to breathe without being able to write and to express my feelings about what's happening in the kingdom. He also said, I have to do some things on behalf of my friends, the others who are unable to present anything. And these were the ideas that led to his leaving the kingdom and going to America, so that he would have a new space within the international journals in order to express his ideas.
That makes sense. Emin, I'm wondering if all of this sounds familiar to you in terms of tactics to silence the press, the story of why Jamal had to leave, of his commitment to being able to speak for those who could no longer speak. As you mentioned, Hatice, there are a number of tactics in the Middle East and elsewhere that are being used to silence journalists. We can mention Turkey, we can mention many other places, but in Azerbaijan as well, you have yourself and your colleagues are subject to ongoing threats.
Thanks for your questions, but according to my experience, since beginning of 2001, when I started work as an investigative journalist, today, after 15 years, I already don't have illusions for this kind of government which is controlled serious and huge oil and gas sources. They have a serious, effective political tools to stay on very huge level of impunity. They are not responsible because even they kill someone, if they are arrested or torture someone, they are still to sell the oil and gas to Western community. They buy the weapons from the Western community, they have a handshakes, and they have an international legitimacy. And the same thing happened with Azerbaijan when President Aliyev, he arrested all prominent journalists, he arrested human rights defenders who exposed his violations, exposed his kleptocracy and corruptions. There's still nothing moving on, like commissioners in the European Union, handshake with him, they are still continuing to negotiate. They welcomed in Italy, in everywhere. But today we need to seriously understand for safe, critical and very strong outspoken voices, we need to have some kind of international journalist safety mechanism. That is important because sometimes we are journalists, we think about other people's safety. We write about violations of millions of people's rights, but we never think about our own rights, about our own safety, and sometimes with by mistake we make a huge situation when we're supposed to be paid huge price. But that's what, in my case, I'm decided do not stay in my country because when I'm I'm tortured in my country, I'm arrested, detained, and when I said no rule of law, nothing, and final thing what they're able to do, arrest me and tortured or maybe killed inside the prison, I'm decided to leave. I'm very sorry. The story with Jamal Khashoggi, it's very heartbreaking, especially for me, because I'm maybe single journalist, which is for last 30 years, successfully saved his life via international mechanism, which is give solutions for human rights defenders and journalists, which is life in risk, to take opportunity and using diplomatic immunity of the embassies for saving his life. I'm asked Swiss government to save my life, and I'm to live approximately 1 year in Swiss embassy. And I know what my government doing with Swiss government, how they try to push and how they, until end, Switzerland protect me and successfully evacuated me from the country. But when I read the story of Jamal, I'm shocked, and I'm also never believe. For me, as just like Turkey, it's maybe not very safe area from journalists which is staying in exile, in the hiding, because in Turkey we have many cases when very outspoken voices from Central Asia, like from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, like opposition leaders, they are asked political asylum in Turkey and they killed. De facto, they are executed by his law enforcement agencies in the middle of the street. And Turkish government never able to give any guarantees to them. And it's with Jamal, what's happened there, it's clear for still nothing moving on, nobody responsible. And today, if you have a lot of oil, I know exactly on my country case, you're able to waste the time and just use momentum to be like,
You don't need to...
yeah.
ولكن هنا نقطة مهمة
But
يجب
there is an
الإشارة
important
إليها
point we have to
أن
refer to here,
قتل جمال
that the killing, the assassination of Jamal, of Mr. Jamal,
ليس قتل أي قتل
is not an ordinary killing,
هنا عندما ذكر أن
because
تركيا
when he
ليست
said
بلد
Turkey
آمن
is not a safe
من
place
حيث
or a safe country
محافظة على
to
صحفيين
preserve
أو
the
حياة
rights
صحفيين.
or the lives of
قد
the
لا
journalists,
يكون في محلها الصحيح
that might
فيما
not be quite
صار
true
لجمال.
with
لأن
what happened to Jamal,
هذا القتل كان
because that
مخطط
assassination
من قبل
was
الدولة
planned by the state,
الأخرى
by the other state,
وبطريقة مختلفة.
and in a different
فمثل
way.
ما زميلتي
And as my colleague
هي
here
فسرت
has
القصة
explained,
لها علاقة بالسلطة
she
القيادة ومستوى عالي جدا هؤلاء المسؤولين
those responsible are in very high levels of the government, and they're very much involved in this assassination. So we cannot say that somebody was killed in the street of Istanbul. No, that was a plan prepared by those who came through official planes and planned for this.
يعني نوعا ما في حساسية في الموضوع، يعني لا نستطيع أن نعمم هذا الاغتيال من داخل لباقي الجرائم التي ترتكب في كل مكان وليس فقط في تركيا.
Well, I take your point, and I think maybe Agnes, you can address some of this
Sure.
in light of the work you've done in the investigation.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I had a little problems with
Us too,
translation, so
yes.
I'm just alerting our dear colleagues. I would like to make two reactions. I think Emin's story is extremely moving, and I want to give credit as well to the Swiss government that did quite a lot to protect him and to use diplomatic immunity to protect a journalist, which is the kind of actions that we want them to do when they can do it. It's not always possible, but when it is possible, I think it's extremely important for the international community to go the extra mileage as they did, as the Swiss authorities did in the case of Emin. And indeed, it is a paradox that in the case of Jamal, the diplomatic immunity of the consulate was actually used for the purpose of killing him, while in the case of Emin, it was used for the purpose of protecting him. In the case of Jamal, it was very clear that we had here the government of Saudi Arabia engaging into a very sophisticated operation involving 15 individuals, all of whom were high-level security officials with the court, and the planning, the organization, the premeditation of the killing of Mr. Jamal Khashoggi leaves absolutely no doubt, and therefore the responsibility of the state of Saudi Arabia is directly engaged. I think what the case of Jamal Khashoggi also shows is the vulnerability of journalists, even when they have traveled and gone abroad to seek safety. So there is no more protection in crossing the borders. There is no more protection in residing in a different country, including in a democracy. There are repeated incidents of journalists abroad being targeted, maybe not necessarily or directly for killings, but certainly for they are threatened, they are harassed, they are told that if they keep speaking up, their family who is left, who is in their countries of origin will be targeted. I personally have received quite a number of allegations around those phenomena, which led me to raise the alarm with the international community. It is not because people are abroad, including with the refugee status, that they are protected. And wherever refugees or human rights defenders are at the moment in exile, or just, they are there for safety purposes, the governments of the countries where they are residing must understand that those individuals may be at greater risk, and more steps must be taken. The responsibility to protect must be seriously understood. In my report on the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, I have called on those governments to review and assess how they are protecting journalists abroad in their territories, and to increase the protection measures if necessary, because we are entering an era where those journalists abroad are not safe. They simply are not safe. And while they may not all be targeted for killings, they are targeted in different ways. And I think threats to their well-beings, threats against their families, harassment in the online space, all of those accumulate to create a real impeachment to living in peace and dignity. And we must take that, those scenarios very seriously. And if I just want to also follow up on the notion of what, is the international community doing enough? It did not do enough for Jamal. It spoke, it made a good number of statements, but it did not act in accordance with their statement. The international community has elected to privilege their economic interest, oil and gas being particularly important, as well as geostrategic consideration, over the protection of human rights. Now, I am not so naive to think that human rights should be the driving force for everything. I'm not suggesting that governments should give up on their economic or geostrategic interest entirely. What certainly I believe is that they need to find a proportionate balance in the way they address both of them. So, for instance, in the case of Jamal, even if governments are not going to engage into large sanctions or boycott, which nobody asks them to do, by the way, but then do not go for holding the G20 in Riyadh. We need to find a just proportion. Holding the G20 in Riyadh is a message, and it is a message that human rights violations in Saudi Arabia do not matter. Holding a G20 in Riyadh 1 year after or two after the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, which violated many principles of international law, is a message. That message is unacceptable, simply unacceptable. So even if I have never asked for radical, sanctions, never. But come on, between radical full sanctions and holding the G20 in Riyadh, there are other things that can be done. And holding the G20 in Riyadh, to me, is unacceptable. It's crossing the line from, into a terrain which is closer to complicity, or certainly to being unwilling to take the necessary actions.
And have there been, or are there states or others who are taking the necessary actions?
At this point,
yes.
For Saudi Arabia or for Azerbaijan, I will say no. At this point, there were some good actions and good steps taken initially. So individualized sanctions of people connected with the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. I think that was a good step. But those individuals that have and are still the object of sanctions are not at the highest level of the chain of command. And therefore, the impact of those sanctions is questionable. So that's not enough. It's simply not enough. If the sanctions, individualized sanctions along the lines of a global Magnitsky kind of sanctions are to be effective, they must be targeting where it bites. They must be targeting people that are going to be really feeling it. Those individuals that are currently targeted, do not feel the sanctions. They were very unlikely to travel anyway. So that's just not sufficient. What's happening at the moment, and Hatice can speak about it far more. Within the US Congress, there are steps taken. The government is not doing anything. European governments are not doing anything. In my view, at this point, the only formal institution that is considering what it can do on a bipartisan basis, meaning both Democrats and Republicans, is the American Congress. And I want to give it credit here, because they are pushing, they have been very systematic in demanding accountability, and they are continuing to do it. I'm hoping that other parliaments around the world are going to take similar steps. And I'll leave Hatice, she can talk about those measures.
Please.
صراحة يعني بالإضافة إلى زملائي ما ذكروا
and beside to what my colleague has said,
we
do need a new dream for our current world. And this dream does not mean that we have to dub new terms and find new terms and expressions. We have to go back to the media. The crime, the killing or assassination of Jamal, in that way, opens the door before a new track, before a new beginning. And we have to make sure that such crimes are not committed again, are not perpetrated again in this era, especially for us living on Earth. Otherwise, how can we preserve our lives, even ordinary people, how they can protect themselves? A lot of things have been written on the killing up to date, but as my colleague has said, nothing happened on the ground. The statements, only statement, there was no political decision taken by any country whatsoever. And we know that the king can do nothing. All those analyses, they confirm that there has been a crime committed on the land of this nation. We know that high-level officials from the kingdom have been involved and they were not held accountable. We did not see any result from the day of the killing up till today. So what the future will hold for us, we even don't know. And to be optimistic, we need at least some shred of light. In the Middle East, a lot of people are wondering today, not only in the Middle East, but also around the world, what will come next? What will be next? It's true that we have to thank the US Congress. We have to thank the Congress for what they have done so far in the United States. But still, we haven't seen any positive outcomes, any positive reaction from the European governments. Even here in Geneva, the UN has drafted a full report and has asked the international community to hold an international inquiry to see what were the connections, what was the involvement of those high-level officials in the crime. And this is really practical. The G20 being held in Riyadh, how can we accept it? As civilians, we have to wonder. And how all those leaders will participate in the G20 summit, whereas there was no accountability, there was no sanction. And where is the body of Jamal? All those leaders in the world, isn't it embarrassing for them? What they will say after this crime, what they will tell their own people after this crime.
Oh, Hatice, thank you. You raised many issues about complicity and accountability. which I feel are often talked about, but it's more difficult to see action. I wonder if we could talk a bit about timelines. I mean, when we talk about taking action, responding to the killing of Jamal, to other threats. I mean, Emin, you said you have been working since the early 2000s. This report was done a year ago. How long will it take to see any sort of action, of change?
I think without sanctions, it's possible to have any change, especially with countries like Azerbaijan, with Saudi Arabia, and other authoritarian states. Because, yeah, sometimes it's for sanctions not working well regarding Russia, but regarding countries like Azerbaijan, I'm sure for sanctions, it's only sanctions alert, even sometimes enough to save the lives. In Azerbaijan, for the last 5 years, we see when 2 congress members or 1 senator make a statement, and after journalist release, at least he's not killed in the prison. The same thing. We have a case with Khadija Ismailova and many other cases, which is without this international alert, maybe my government killed our colleagues inside the prison. And sometimes we heard about well-known cases, but dozens of cases still stay unresponsible because only in my family for last, and in our organization, we lost 2 persons. I'm successfully escaped from my country, but exactly a year later, they killed my assistant, Rasim Aliyev. On the 3rd anniversary of my escape, they killed my mother, again, in the same date when I'm successfully able to escape. And they try to, this is like organizing crimes. They have a very strong and concrete decisions to just, without any compromise, to keep silent from all his critics, but still they have things to lose. And dictators, which is their money is accumulated in Western bank systems. They're using the Western bank systems, and they now, especially with when we saw what's happened with this coronavirus and oil prices, the countries even which is biggest exporters like Russia, Saudi Arabia, Azerbaijan of oil energy exporters, they're year by year they're more dependent from international foreign aid. They're looking for cheap loans, etc., etc. They are not still powerful, but I'm sure for our journalist community and human rights community, we need to work hard. Like, for example, if a colleague of Sergei Magnitsky, Bill brother, day by day, he's not moved between the different states, we never have this mechanism of Magnitsky sanctions law. But today, for each case, I know for maybe Hatice know how it's difficult with country with have reach all resources to find success with the sanctions. Sometimes our lobbyists, they distribute millions of dollars in Washington, in Brussels. We produce report about political prisoners in Council of Europe, which is Azerbaijan is part of the Europe. We have a strong obligation in front of the Council of Europe, exactly the same like UK or Switzerland. But Azerbaijan have 130 political prisoners, approximately 10 journalists, bloggers, activists, which is detained and arrested for expressing themselves. Still, this recommendation on obligation didn't work. And when we're going and force this European politician and say, look, you have a European Convention for Human Rights. Why you don't doing anything? And after a few years, we understand my government just distributed in the envelope millions of dollars between hundreds of politicians, and they close their eyes. And today, without strong civil society, unfortunately, we can't find success. And in my country today, we stay alone. We have a huge numbers of investigative journalists, but when we can't ask the funds, we have a huge problem with the lack of funding. We have experience to expose corruptions, but we don't have free market economy. We don't have any sources to find solutions for finance our activities, and most of the donors, like European Union, they leave us alone. US, most of the donors leave Azerbaijani civil society alone, and we say, we want to expose corruptions. Can you give us money or grants as we were doing before 2014? They said, look, guys, we are afraid if you give you grants, you are killed. Let's just give you political asylum, that's it. And you can start your new life in abroad. That's without strong international solidarity and support, it's difficult to survive for people like us in our countries.
The silence, I think the message we've got to insist upon communicating to governments around the world is that their silence or their lack of actions when confronted with cases particularly of repeated violations, of massive violations, that emboldens the governments responsible for those violations. There is no doubt in my mind, as Emin has pointed out with specific example, and I have seen it as well, that when public officials of a country speak up and denounce the attacks against individuals, the imprisonment of individuals, particularly journalists or human rights defenders, that is protecting them. We speaking up protect people on the ground. We denouncing the silencing and the shrinking of civic space, that protect people on the front line of fighting for that civic space. So that's why I think I personally, but I think many others are insisting that it is incumbent upon the so-called international community to keep raising the issue. It is incumbent upon the international community to keep demanding accountability and not hoping that all of us will get so tired that eventually we'll move on, this is exactly what's happening. Oh, well, Hatice will get tired, Agnès will get tired, Emin will get tired, and we can move on and go and enjoy ourselves in Riyadh for the G20. We need to hold our own governments to account. We need to understand that when they are silent or when they allow themselves to be instrumentalized by those governments who are practicing censorship and killing, it is impacting on our own democracy. It is impacting on our own rights. And surely they should not participate to the weakening of those institutions and those values that have made us who we are as a people and ultimately as an international community.
So what can we, our viewers, all of us as public citizens, what can we do to battle threats against the free press? What can we do to hold our governments accountable?
My colleagues mentioned important matters. We need strong civil organizations. Here I'd like to ask a question. We are in Geneva, maybe one of the strongest countries in terms of civil society, and especially the civil societies in Europe are stronger than what they are in the Middle East. But when we have a look at the Jamal's case, in particular, where are these strong civil societies? That's the question. Now, the greater question is the organizations themselves, even if they are strong, cannot provide any service of a political solution to resolve the current crises that we are facing. Here, politics are involved, and those ruling the governments, they are acting according to their interests between two persons or two governments. There have to be laws that protect people in such situations. And as Agnes has already mentioned, so that democracies do not weaken. Why did we thank America a while ago? Because we said it's a country of institutions. Yes, the President of America took a negative position towards this case, but there is the Congress, there are organizations, there are people who are using these instruments to render the perpetrators accountable. But when such organizations weaken, how will we be able to make progress? So that is the question. So there has to be something that is above the law, above the governments. Let us turn the page today and call upon those who are responsible, in charge, so that we come up with new laws that will protect journalists around the world and not just in the country that perpetrates a crime.
Yes.
I think there are a range of things that can be done. First of all, at least as far as representative democracies are concerned, those officials, the elected officials, listen to the people who elect them. So I know for a fact, because during my investigations or my work, whenever I speak with officials, they are always concerned about public opinion. Public opinion, please speak up, because your elected representative will listen to you. I was told by someone who should remain unknown that the worst thing for the normalization of the relationship between a country and Saudi Arabia was public opinion in a particular country. So when the public opinion speak up on behalf of justice for Jamal, on behalf of Emin and his colleagues, on behalf of the women, human rights defenders that are still in prison, having been tortured and raped in a Saudi prison, when public opinion speak up, when public opinion march, when public opinion stand up for those individuals, their elected officials have to listen to them. So the first thing is, and by working on behalf of those individuals, we are also working to make our democracy strong. When we silence ourselves because we have other things to do, because of the coronavirus, because of, when we do that, we weaken our own governance system and our international community. So the public opinion must speak up. But moving on from that particular issue, there are a range of other things that governments can do. We talked about sanctions. I think these are an interesting tool, individualized sanctions. We need to sanction individuals who are responsible for threatening journalists before they have to leave, before they are killed, before they are imprisoned. That's a very, that's a tool. It is not blunt, because we do not sanction a whole country. We are sanctioning those individuals who are behind the threats, whether they're in the private sector or in the government, who are targeting individuals. Those sanctions can be made far more effective than they are at the moment. As an international community, I think we need to understand that every time we condemn the lack of justice, every time, there is no doubt that for 1 year, and 2 in fact, between the Washington Post and other international media, between the work of Hatice, between my own investigation, all of that have combined to create a message. And this is a message that not only Saudi Arabia, but other governments around the world are hearing. It is a message that we are not giving up. We are not turning the eyes because we're getting tired. In fact, we are not getting tired. So the international community, by speaking up, can do more. The UN can do more. Investigation matters. If there is a gap in accountability, if countries are not prepared to investigate, then let's help them investigate. Let's give a support for investigation. All of those things can be done and should be done if we want to create an environment where killing, imprisonment, a threat becomes the anomaly, becomes the exception and not the norm.
So, as Hatice so nicely put it, let us turn the page.
Yeah.
Let's turn the page. Let's hold our governments to account, hold others to account, use our public voice, and do what we can to ensure that reporters can report and do their job. Emin, I don't mean to embarrass you, but I want to close with a quote from the film Courage that you had, in which you said, speaking of journalists, "We are not like soldiers. Our war is to continue to produce our reporting and to be able to share this material with people and change opinion and develop a critical mind." So I thank all three of you for your work on behalf of the Geneva Film Festival, on behalf of the New Humanitarian as well, which allows our reporters to keep doing their work. For our viewers, you can watch other conversations online at FIFDH, and you can watch the film online at Courage. And please do check out the New Humanitarian at thenewhumanitarian.org. Thank you so much.
Thank you.